The puppy hit the clinic door so hard that the glass rattled, then skidded across the tile and stopped with both paws pressed against the legs of the old military K9 lying beside the reception desk. The retired shepherd did not lift his head. He only gave one slow breath, as if he had already seen too much for one lifetime and could not afford to be surprised again. Behind the counter, Nurse Evelyn Hart froze mid-step with a stack of charts in her hands. "Hey, wait," she said, but the puppy was already circling back, whining, then returning to the same dog again, as if the whole world had narrowed to one impossible fact. It kept coming back. At the front desk, Mrs. Klein from the diner covered her mouth. "That's the third time today," she whispered. "Every time someone takes him away, he runs right back here." The old K9 finally opened his eyes at the sound of the tiny paws scratching the floor. His tail moved once, barely. Not excitement. Recognition. Evelyn set the charts down and crouched slowly, careful not to startle either dog. The puppy was small, dusty, one ear folded wrong, a thin blue collar cut through with a torn tag that looked too new to be old and too worn to be accidental. He pressed his nose to the K9's muzzle and let out a sound so soft it was almost a plea. The shepherd answered with a low, tired huff, then nudged the puppy closer with a nose that had clearly learned how to make room for survivors. "Where did you come from?" Evelyn murmured, reaching for the tag. The moment her fingers touched the collar, the puppy jerked back and clamped the tag between his teeth, not growling, not afraid, protective. Outside, someone shouted her name from the parking lot. "Nurse, he's doing it again." A man in a delivery vest stood by a white van with the side door open. Waving a leash like this was a routine nuisance. "That mutt keeps escaping," he called. "We already picked him up twice." The puppy did not move toward the man. He backed farther into the K9's side until his small body fit against the bigger dog's ribs like a missing piece snapping into place. Evelyn looked at the retired shepherd, then at the puppy, then at the delivery van. Something was wrong. The dog was not lost. He was returning. To this exact place. To this exact old soldier. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and snapped a photo of the blue collar tag before anyone could stop her. The screen caught a partial stamp in the metal, a faded unit mark, a set of numbers, and one word that made her stomach tighten. Not a breeder's code. Not a shelter tag. A military identifier. The old K9's head lifted at once. His ears went forward for the first time all day. Evelyn felt the change before she understood it. The puppy had stopped whining. The clinic had gone quiet. And in that silence, she realized this wasn't a stray finding home. It was a message finding the only dog alive who was supposed to know what it meant. What did a lost puppy know that kept pulling him back here? Evelyn didn't have time to wonder twice. The old shepherd had lifted his head, and that alone changed the room. His nose tracked the puppy in short, sharp movements. Then he pushed himself to his feet with the stiff, practiced patience of an animal that had once learned to stand up under worse conditions than this. The puppy gave one excited yip and scrambled toward the back hall, then stopped, turned, and looked over his shoulder as if impatient for someone to follow. Evelyn set the charts down on the counter and reached for the clinic phone, already dialing. "Marcus," she said when the veterinarian answered, "I need you back in the treatment room now. And bring the scanner." The receptionist at the front desk started to object, but Evelyn was already moving, one hand guiding the old K9, while the other caught the puppy before he could vanish down the hallway again. The small dog wriggled, not to escape, but to lead, his paws tapping the tile with a purpose that made no sense until he lunged straight for the supply door and scratched at the baseboard. Evelyn dropped to one knee. The shepherd came beside her at once, and in the tight space between the wall and the cabinet, her fingers found something wrapped in cloth and dust. A second tag. Older. Heavier. She wiped it clean against her sleeve, and the stamped letters came into view just enough to make her breath catch. Not a pet tag. Not a family keepsake. Another military identifier, buried where no one would think to look. Before she could speak, the front doors banged open hard enough to rattle the frames. Two men in dark jackets strode into the clinic with the alert posture of people who had spent their lives searching for things that did not want to be found. One of them stopped the moment he saw the shepherd standing beside Evelyn. The other fixed his eyes on the puppy in her arms. "Where did you get that dog?" he asked. Evelyn rose slowly, keeping her body between them and the back hall. He came here by himself, she said. The man's jaw tightened. He pulled out a phone, checked a photo, then looked past her toward the old dog with a face gone pale. No, he said quietly. That's not possible. That animal was listed as recovered years ago. The shepherd gave a low, warning sound, not loud, not threatening, just enough to make both men stop advancing. Evelyn felt the puppy press closer against her chest. Marcus came through the treatment room door at that exact moment, scanner in hand, and froze when he saw the strangers. What's going on? He asked. Nobody answered him. One of the men was already looking at the dog, then at the cloth-wrapped tag in Evelyn's hand, as if the shape of the truth were starting to form and he didn't like where it was going. The old shepherd took one slow step toward the back hallway, then another, eyes fixed on the door at the end, as if something behind it had finally called him home. And when Evelyn followed his gaze, she realized the puppy hadn't brought them astray at all. He had brought them back to a place someone had tried very hard to forget. Marcus stepped in front of the kennel door before anyone else could reach it, his hand flat against the frame, as if he could hold the whole room, still by force alone. Nobody touches either dog until I say so, he snapped, looking straight at the two men from the back hallway. One of them started to answer, but Evelyn had already moved. She set the puppy gently on the floor, and the little thing shot forward again, not toward the men, not toward the door, but toward the old shepherd, circling once before pressing its nose against the dog's chest, as if checking for something only it could feel. The shepherd lowered his head and took one careful step back, then another, making room. Evelyn noticed it then. The dog wasn't just reacting. He was waiting for her. Get him away from that kennel, one of the men said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Until you tell me what I'm looking at, I'm not moving anything, Evelyn replied, and the calm in her voice seemed to make the room even smaller. She knelt beside the shepherd, not rushing, not forcing, just letting her fingers hover near his collar. The cloth-wrapped tag in her hand had already begun to feel heavier, as if it wanted to be seen. The puppy gave a sharp whine and pawed once at the concrete floor. Then, from the old shepherd, came a low sound that was not a warning this time, but a signal. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She turned the dog's head just enough to catch the edge of a faded unit mark beneath the fur, nearly hidden near the inside of the ear. Marcus inhaled sharply. One of the men stepped closer, then stopped when the shepherd shifted his body between them and Evelyn with a precision too clean to be accidental. The clinic's front door chimed again. This time, no one moved to answer it. Outside, engines rolled to a stop one after another, heavy and disciplined. Through the glass, black SUVs filled the lot in a neat line, and the reflection of their headlights washed across the waiting room like a silent order. The two men at the back hallway went pale. One of them reached for his radio, then froze when it crackled to life on its own with a single clipped voice asking for confirmation on a name no one in the room had spoken aloud. Evelyn looked down at the puppy. It had gone still, its tiny body pressed against her ankle like it knew the door had finally opened to something much bigger than a stray. The shepherd lifted his head, ears forward, eyes fixed on the entrance. And when the front doors began to open from the outside, Evelyn understood that whatever truth had been following this dog home was no longer staying hidden. The front doors opened wider, and the first man through them did not look like clinic staff. He wore a dark field jacket, stood with the kind of stillness that made the room narrow around him, and his eyes went straight to the old shepherd as if they had met before. Marcus moved at once, placing himself between the newcomers and the kennel run, but Evelyn was already acting. The puppy had begun to tremble again, not in fear, but in urgency, nosing hard at her wrist and then at the shepherd, as if demanding one more thing be done before anyone started asking questions. Take the puppy to exam too, Evelyn said, already reaching for the leash. Keep the doors open. If he came back here this many times, something on him needs to be checked before it's missed again. It was a simple order, but it changed the room. Marcus didn't argue. He just grabbed the clipboard and signaled the nurse at the front desk to clear the hall. That small shift in control was the first ripple, and Evelyn used it without looking up. The stranger in the field jacket stopped 3 feet inside the clinic and watched her work with the puppy, then the shepherd, then the crate with the slow, measuring attention of someone counting things other people never noticed. You always move like that? He asked. Evelyn didn't answer. She was already checking the puppy's paws, its ears, the frayed collar hidden under matted fur. Her fingers paused at the clasp, not because it was broken, because it was older than it should have been, worn by years of hands that had opened and closed it with muscle memory. She turned it over once, and for the briefest second her thumb brushed a tiny stamped code on the underside. Marcus saw the motion. So did the man in the field jacket. Neither of them said a word, but the air tightened anyway. Evelyn slipped the collar into a clean tray without making it a moment. Then she looked at the shepherd. He had risen halfway from his bed, one paw planted, ears locked on the jacketed man. The dog was waiting for a command that never came, or one that already had. "Keep him still," Evelyn said, and reached for a slim scanner from the counter. The puppy had started whining again, but she ignored the sound and swept the light over the animal's neck. Nothing obvious. She scanned a second time, slower. A faint shape flashed on the screen and vanished before anyone else could catch it. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. She tilted the scanner and tried again. The shape returned, just long enough for her to freeze. Not a wound, not a chip. A tiny metal tag embedded under the skin, placed with surgical precision where only someone looking for it would find it. Marcus exhaled once, low and uncertain. The man in the jacket took one step forward, then stopped when Evelyn lifted a hand without looking at him. "Nobody moves it," she said. "Not yet." That should have ended it. Instead, the room answered with a fresh problem. The clinic phone began to ring, sharp and relentless, and the caller ID made the front desk nurse go pale. The field jacket man reached for it before anyone else could, but Evelyn was already there, one hand on the scanner, the other taking the receiver. She didn't speak first. She listened. Her face changed only slightly, but Marcus saw it. The instant recognition, the quiet calculation, the decision made before the voice on the line had finished its warning. When she finally answered, she used a tone so calm it made the whole room feel smaller. "Yes," she said. "I see it now." Then she looked at the shepherd, at the puppy, at the stamped code she had not shown anyone else, and added, "And if you're calling about the old unit file, you're already too late." The line went dead. Outside, another engine rolled into the parking lot. Then another. And this time, Evelyn did not turn toward the door. She turned toward the back hallway, where the locked records room waited with one file she had not meant to open. The back hallway door was already unlocked when Evelyn reached it, as if the building itself had decided not to argue anymore. She pulled the records room open just enough to slip inside, and the old shepherd followed, so close his shoulder brushed her leg. The puppy stayed planted in the threshold, ears high, staring at the dark room as though it recognized a place it had never seen. Evelyn crossed to the metal filing cabinet, found the stamped code again, and slid the drawer out. Inside was a single waterproof envelope, gray and sealed, with a black paw print stamped over a faded military crest. Marcus came in behind her and stopped short. The field jacket man did not ask permission this time. He simply took one step forward, saw the envelope, and let out one slow breath. Evelyn broke the seal. The first page inside was not a name. It was a transfer order. Not for the dog. For her. Marcus's hand tightened on the door frame as Evelyn read the next line, then the next. She was not clinic staff on paper. She was temporary custody, temporary oversight, temporary handler support. And the signature at the bottom belonged to a retired K-9 command colonel who had died 3 years ago. Before anyone could speak, the old shepherd moved. He walked straight to the back wall, nose low, then pressed his muzzle against a loose panel half hidden behind a shelf of boxed supplies. Evelyn reached for it at the same moment the puppy bolted forward and started scratching furiously at the floorboards. Marcus pulled the shelf aside, and behind it sat a narrow steel safe that none of them had noticed before. The field jacket man went still. Evelyn knelt, turned the hidden dial by instinct, and the safe opened on the first try. Inside was a dog tag, a folded map, and a single photograph sealed in plastic. The puppy gave one sharp cry and jumped into her lap, trembling. The photo showed the same shepherd younger, standing beside a line of retired military K-9 handlers, and at the center of them was Evelyn, in combat fatigues, her face older by years, and her hair cut short enough to barely touch her collar. Marcus stared at her like the room had lost its air. Evelyn did not look at him. She was already reading the map, already seeing the marked route, the grid squares, the dates, the coded notes written in the margins. Her fingers stopped at one line. Not a memory. An instruction. Bring the dog home before they do. The field jacket man reached for the radio on his belt, then stopped when the old shepherd growled, low and warning, and planted himself between the safe and the door. Outside, engines were idling louder now, one after another, filling the parking lot with the sound of a closing net. Marcus looked from the photo to Evelyn's face to the dog tag in her hand, and whatever he had been about to say died before it reached his mouth. Evelyn rose slowly, the map still open, the puppy pressed against her chest, and for the first time the room obeyed her without question. She handed the field jacket man the photo and pointed to the route marked in red. "Lock the front door," she said. "No one leaves until I know who else has that file." He did not argue. He only nodded once and reached for the keys. Then the hallway lights flickered, went dim, and from somewhere outside came a hard knock that did not sound like a request. The old shepherd turned toward it, every muscle tight, while the puppy in Evelyn's arms let out a tiny, certain bark, as if it had been waiting for that sound all along. The hard knock came again, and this time Evelyn moved before anyone else could. She slid the puppy into Marcus's arms, closed her fingers around the old shepherd's collar, and pointed him toward the rear side door. The dog hesitated only once, then obeyed with the kind of trust that did not come from training alone. In the same motion, Evelyn reached for the records folder still open on the desk and shut it flat, not because the answers were inside, but because the questions were now coming through the wall. Marcus started to ask something, then stopped when he saw the look on her face. No hesitation, no panic, just a quiet urgency that made him follow her without argument. They crossed the room as the lights flickered overhead, and Evelyn pressed the puppy against her jacket with one arm, while using the other hand to snap the deadbolt on the safe. The little dog gave a sharp, anxious bark, and the old shepherd answered with a low rumble toward the door, as if both of them understood that the sound outside was not random. It was familiar. Another knock landed, heavier than before, and the field jacket man at the front finally came back on the line, his voice clipped and tight. More vehicles had just pulled into the lot. Not staff. Not local security. Men with purpose. Evelyn did not waste a second asking who. She was already moving toward the maps spread across the metal cabinet, tracing the red route with one finger, then stopping at a corner where the ink had bled through the paper from being handled too many times. Her eyes narrowed. She turned the page over and found what had been hidden beneath it, a faded kennel number, a date, and the initials of a unit nobody in the clinic should have known how to write. Marcus saw it at the same time she did, and his expression changed in a way that made the room feel smaller. He looked from the paper to the old shepherd, then to the scar that cut across Evelyn's knuckle as she folded the map with steady hands. That tiny movement, so practiced it was almost invisible, pulled something loose in him. This was not a nurse improvising under pressure. This was someone who had spent years learning how to keep order when order had already begun to fail. The realization spread fast. The man at the door stopped speaking over the radio and waited for her to finish reading the room before he spoke again. Outside, engines idled in a tighter ring now, and the parking lot lights washed across the blinds in sharp white bars. Evelyn set the puppy down, then checked the old shepherd's leash clip with the same quick precision she had used on the records cabinet. The choice she made next was small, but it changed everything. Instead of staying with the folder, she walked to the rear hall, opened the side door 1 inch, and listened. On the other side came a familiar command voice, low and controlled, calling her name like it belonged to a file that should never have been opened. For one breath, it seemed as if the truth was about to step fully into the light. Then Evelyn quietly turned the knob until the door widened just enough to let the old shepherd see out first. He stood rigid, tail still, and gave a single, answering whine toward the dark. The voice on the other side went silent. The silence that followed was worse than a shout. Somewhere in that pause, one of the men outside said, very carefully, "Ma'am, we found the rest of the kennel records." And when Evelyn reached for the folder again, the edge of a second name, one she had not seen before, slid into view. The old shepherd moved before anyone else did. He stepped between Evelyn and the open doorway, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the men outside, as if he knew exactly which one had just taken a breath too late. Then the puppy in Marcus's arms gave a sharp, urgent cry, and the sound snapped the whole room into motion. One of the men outside lowered his hand from his radio. Another took a half step back. Evelyn did not waste the opening. She crossed to the records room in 3 quick strides, set the folder on the desk, and flipped straight to the second name that had slid into view. Her fingers stopped. The room seemed to stop with them. Marcus leaned in, saw the line for himself, and without saying a word, turned and locked the front hall door. It was not a question anymore. It was a decision. Evelyn pulled a thin sheet from the folder and held it under the lamp. A matching tag number, an intake date, a transfer note signed by a clinic administrator who had vanished from the state years ago. Outside, the hard knock came again, heavier this time, but no one moved to answer it. The shepherd did. He limped to the door, pressed his nose to the crack, and gave one low, broken sound that was not a warning and not a greeting, but recognition. One of the men outside finally spoke through the wood, and when his voice came through, it was stripped of all command. "Ma'am," he said, "the sealed transport log was changed after midnight. This dog was never supposed to come here." Evelyn's hand tightened on the paper. She did not look at him. She looked at the puppy, then at the old shepherd, then back to the file. The truth was no longer hiding in the records. It was standing in the room, breathing hard through a collar worn thin with time. Evelyn reached down, unlatched the puppy's harness, and set him carefully on the floor. The small dog wobbled once, then trotted straight to the shepherd and pressed his body against the older dog's leg. The shepherd lowered his head until their noses touched. Marcus exhaled like he had been holding his breath for days. Evelyn tore the transfer note free, crossed the room, and opened the side door wide enough for the men outside to see the paper in her hand. "You are not taking him back tonight," she said, calm and flat. No one argued. One man stepped aside. Another lowered his gaze. And then the one who had called her name before gave a slow nod and reached into his coat for a new envelope, this one sealed with red tape. He held it out, not to the men behind him, but to Evelyn. She did not take it at first. She looked down at the shepherd, now sitting very still beside the puppy, and then she took the envelope with the same steady hand she used to close a wound. Inside was one line and a signature that made her jaw tighten. The same clinic administrator, the same vanished name, the same order, older than the records and colder than the room. Marcus saw her face change and moved closer, but Evelyn had already turned the envelope over, already seeing the return address stamped on the back. The shelter was not the end of the paper trail. It was the beginning, and in the silence that followed, the old shepherd lifted one paw and rested it against Evelyn's boot, as if he had chosen her to. The envelope stayed in Evelyn's hand for only a moment before she folded it closed and set it gently on the nearest counter, as if even paper could feel fear in this room. Then she reached down, touched the shepherd once behind the ear, and looked toward the open records room. Marcus followed her without a word. Inside, the old shelves and metal files seemed smaller now, stripped of their mystery by the light from the hallway. Evelyn opened the drawer she had been guarding and drew out the kennel ledger, then the second folder, then the thin stack of intake cards the men had brought in from the shelter. She sorted them with slow, exact movements, her fingers steady, her face unreadable, while the puppy watched from Marcus's arms as if he understood this was work, not drama. One of the men in field jackets stepped forward and, instead of asking questions, began taking the older boxes from the top shelf and carrying them to the table. Another quietly set down a fresh lamp when the overhead light flickered. No one spoke above a murmur. No one tried to fill the silence that Evelyn kept leaving between each page. Outside, the sound of engines had softened. Inside, the room was changing anyway. The same men who had once stood rigid in their own certainty now moved around her like they had finally learned where to put their hands. Evelyn stopped at one card, then another, and for the first time her expression shifted. Not surprise. Recognition. She slid 2 records together, checked a date, and turned slightly toward Marcus. He leaned in, saw the match, and reached for the wall phone without waiting for her to ask. A moment later, 2 calls went out. One to the shelter, one to a county clerk. No speeches followed, only action. The old shepherd rose and crossed the room with slow dignity, stopping beside the filing cabinet where Evelyn had once left her coffee. He sat there as if that had become his place now. The puppy wriggled free when Marcus crouched and set him down on the floor, and without hesitation he padded straight to Evelyn, pressed his nose against her ankle, and settled there with a tiny sigh. Evelyn looked down, and the first real softness of the night moved across her face. She bent, lifted him with one hand, and tucked him against her chest while still keeping the folder open in her other hand. In the doorway, one of the field men noticed the motion and quietly pulled the door wider so the two dogs could pass through together. No one announced it, but the room seemed to make room for that too. By the time Evelyn finished the last page, a small stack of corrected records sat neatly beside her. A fresh pot of coffee had appeared on the side table, and the man who had once asked for her name now stood by the door, holding it open without looking at her, as though waiting for permission. She gave him a single nod. That was enough. When she finally stepped into the hallway, the shepherd walked on one side of her and the puppy on the other, both calm, both close, both keeping pace as if they had known from the start where they belonged. At the end of the corridor, the clinic's front window caught the first gray light of morning, and in that pale reflection, Evelyn saw the three of them move together, quiet and unbroken, toward the entrance where the next day was already waiting. The smallest handoff came last. Marcus placed the red-taped envelope back into her palm, then closed her fingers around it with care. Evelyn didn't open it again. She only held it, looked once at the old shepherd, and then walked on. And this time, no one followed because they were told to. They followed because she had already shown them the way. Evelyn did not lock the records room that night. She only slid the drawer shut with one slow hand and left the lamp on low, so the hallway stayed warm with a narrow strip of gold. By morning, the clinic had settled into the kind of silence that never really belonged to empty rooms. It belonged to sleeping animals, to old floors, to people who had finally stopped bracing for the next bad thing. The shepherd was the first to move. He was already by the front window when Evelyn came in with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a folded blanket in the other, his nose angled toward the glass where the street was still wet from the night before. The puppy was behind her heels, not quite trotting, not quite walking, doing that awkward little stop and start that made the whole room feel lighter. Without being asked, Marcus set down the small dish of water by the chair near the door. He did it the same careful way she had once shown him how to stack bandages and sort labels, as if steady hands could become a habit. Evelyn noticed, but only for a second. Then she bent, checked the puppy's bandage, and changed nothing except the angle of the wrap. Later, when an older man from the neighborhood came in with stiff shoulders and a dog leash wrapped twice around his wrist, he stood uncertainly in the entryway until the shepherd lifted his head and gave one low, calm huff. The man exhaled, looked down, and loosened his grip without a word. Evelyn took the leash, clipped it to the hook by the desk, and handed him a seat before he could insist he was fine. No one called attention to it. They just made room. Outside, the red-taped envelope sat on the counter where she had left it, still unopened. Its edge softened now from being touched and moved and passed between hands that no longer seemed afraid of it. By noon, one of the volunteers had quietly placed a fresh bowl of water beside it, as if even the paper belonged to the day now. The puppy slept under the desk for most of the afternoon with one paw stretched toward Evelyn's shoe. Every so often, the shepherd would cross the room, glance at the door, and then settle again beside the window, his body no longer tense at the sound of cars passing on the street. He was listening for something, but not with fear anymore. Near closing time, Marcus paused at the counter with a stack of forms in his hand and a pen behind his ear. He did not ask for help at first. He only held out one page, and Evelyn, without looking up, reached for it and marked the missing line where his fingers had hesitated. He watched her write, then took the paper back and placed it on top of the others with the same quiet care she had given him all along. The last light shifted across the floorboards. Evelyn picked up the puppy, carried him to the blanket by the heater, and set him down beside the shepherd. The old dog opened one eye, then closed it again when the puppy pressed against his side. That was all. No speech, no ceremony. Only the soft scrape of a chair, the rustle of paper, the steady rhythm of breathing in a room that had finally learned how to rest. When Evelyn turned off the lamp, the window held their reflections for one brief second. The nurse, the old shepherd, the small pup between them, all of them quiet, all of them still here. Then the glass went dark, and the room kept its peace.